Hey, it's Jay, and I don't normally do these kind of videos. I've actually never done a travel video before, but this is a DIY channel, so I figured, hey, why not do a DIY guide to help others plan their trip to Iceland? Okay, so let's get into it. First thing I did was sit down and just research the country and figured out where we wanted to go. We planned March over spring break because we really wanted to see the northern lights, so that gave us a window of 10 days to play around with. I've linked our itinerary and budget in the description below, so feel free to check out that Google Doc. But instead of telling you how I planned it, I figure it's just easier to show you our trip, and then I'll tell you tips along the way. Once we had our window of time, I purchased our tickets. We flew from Jacksonville, Florida up to JFK in New York City, and then hopped on another plane, Iceland Air, and flew to Reykjavik. From New York to Iceland, it was about a 5.5 hour flight. And when we left, there was a 5-hour time change difference. When we left Florida, it was 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And when we arrived in Iceland, it was 14 degrees Fahrenheit with a -9 wind chill. So make sure you have your really warm clothes close by. Now, because it was wintertime, we had rented a 4-wheel drive vehicle. We rented from Ice Rental 4x4, and they were absolutely wonderful. But I asked the guy at the airport where Ice Rental was, and so he put me on a shuttle, the whole family. We got all of our suitcases in, traveled all the way over there, and they couldn't find my car. Well, it turns out there's a second company called Ice Rental. So we've got Ice Rental and Ice Rental 4x4. So we were at the wrong place, unfortunately, and it was 6 a.m. in the morning. We were pretty tired. The Ice Rental people kind of just laughed and said, oh, sorry about that. It happens several times a day. Fortunately, there was a really nice group of people listening in on our story, also from Florida, who gave me a lift over to the correct rental place, and we were on our way. When you rent a car in Iceland, they warn you about the wind. It can pick up gravel and shatter your windows. When you open your door, it can completely rip your door off if you're not careful. We didn't have any issues on our trip, but I can definitely see how the wind could damage your rental car if you're not careful. Our first stop was the Blue Lagoon. It's only about a 20-minute drive from the airport, and it was like the perfect, relaxing spa experience to get over some jet lag. This is something you have to book online ahead of time. You make a reservation. We were actually over an hour late for ours, but they were really nice about it and let us in. But they give you a locker. You can put all your clothes in there. You get stripped down to your bathing suit. They have showers with soap and shampoo and conditioner. And then you just walk downstairs. You're still inside in the nice warm heat, and you can walk right into the lagoon. And then there's a door that leads to the outdoors. So it's not quite the shock that we were expecting. It was actually quite pleasant. Now, it was definitely a surreal experience because it was 100 degrees in the water, and it was 14 degrees outside with a -9 wind chill. So your head was freezing and your body was warm, but it actually felt really good. The kids were free, so we only had to pay for 2 adults. In the lagoon itself, they have a little mud mask station where you get a silica mask, and then they also have a snack bar, and adults get a free drink with their ticket. They give you a little wristband, and then it keeps track of what you spend. So at the end, before you check out, you just settle your balance. There's also an on-site cafe and restaurant, and we ended up having lunch at the restaurant. It was really good. After lunch, we headed over to Reykjavik to check into our hotel. When I was booking our rooms, I found that it was challenging for Iceland to accommodate a family of 5. So I ended up booking a lot of apartments, and then one night we had to actually book 2 hotel rooms. The first night we ended up going with the Kvassen downtown hotel, which really was in the center of everything. Had parking for the car, which was nice. There were a lot of restaurants close by, and then there was also a grocery store, which was key because we stocked up on snacks and other things for traveling in the car. At this time, it was absolutely freezing to walk around, but we muscled through, and we actually went to a famous hot dog stand, which is the national food of Iceland. And then we also went to a sushi conveyor belt restaurant where you just pick off the sushi that you want, and then you pay for the plates at the end. Pretty cool.
Can I have chopsticks?
On to day 3. Today we're going to be hitting some of the highlights of the Golden Circle. I think it's really important, especially in the wintertime, to check road.is, which is a really good website, and it tells you about all the road conditions in Iceland. First stop is Thingvellir National Park. It's one of 3 national parks in Iceland, and it has ancient Viking history here. In 930, a parliament was established here, making it the oldest and longest running parliament in history. It's now located in Reykjavik, but it used to be located right in the national park back in the day. This park is actually located in a rift valley, and is the spot where the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates meet, except they're moving apart about 2 centimeters per year, which creates these huge fissures in the earth. The next stop on our list was the Nestavlir viewpoint, which is a geothermal area, so you see a lot of steam coming up. But on our way down there, we actually saw this. After watching the ice for a little bit, we headed on to Nestavlir. We got there and the road was actually closed. We may have gone beyond the sign and found that the road was just had a little bit of ice on it. It really wasn't bad at all, but we just kind of stopped real quick, took this picture, and then headed on to Carrot Crater Lake. Geologists aren't really sure when Carrot Crater was created, but they think in the last 10,000 years, the entire volcano exploded violently, creating a massive crater, and then the lake formed over thousands of years of it filling up with water. When you arrive, there's a small fee for adults, but kids are free. You can hike around the entire rim of the crater, and then there's a path that leads all the way down to the lake. We then drove to Reykjavik Valley, where you can see the geothermal springs and also the mud pots. This is also a Rift Valley area where the plates are moving apart from one another, so therefore the crust of the earth is really thin and there's a lot of geothermal activity going on. We did a really fun hike here. There was some snow, so the kids had fun taking the snow and throwing it in the geothermal rivers and watching it melt. There were actually geothermal creeks and springs all over the place during the entire hike. There was a parking fee, but it was a little bit different than normal. A camera catches your license plate on the way in, and then you actually settle your tab at the end because it tracks how long you've been there. The longer you're there, the greater the fee. Not that it was that much. After that, we stopped in town and had some good wood oven pizza and some Icelandic beer at the Ulverk Pizza and Brewery. We were also able to fill up the car with some Petrol 95 and get some groceries for the next day. After that, we drove down to Iceland, which is a little small village on the water, to stay for the night in our apartment. There were no northern lights that night, but I took my first stab at photographing the night sky. So here's a very, very quick tutorial on how to shoot the northern lights. First, you need a camera with a wide-angle lens. Mine's a 16 to 35 millimeter. You set the lens to manual focus. You focus it on infinity, but then back it off just a little bit so that you can get the foreground in focus. You put the f-stop as low as you can. For this lens, mine's a 2.8, so that's as low as I could go. And then depending on how much light you have around your area, you want to open the shutter anywhere from 5 seconds to a maximum of 20 seconds. So that's kind of the camera setup, but a tripod is absolutely necessary. There's no way you can hold a camera still for 10 to 15 seconds. I was able to find a really nice travel tripod on Amazon before I left. I'm going to link all my equipment in the description just in case you're curious what I used. Next morning, we just climbed on some rocks right outside our Airbnb. Then we said goodbye to Reykjavik to continue our journey on the Golden Circle. First stop was Gullfoss Falls. And if you haven't figured it out yet, the word foss in Icelandic means falls. It was about an hour drive and there were actually a ton of waterfalls on the way, but they all required a hike. And it was so cold outside that we decided to just go for the short hikes so that we didn't freeze. Geologists think this waterfall was formed at the end of the last ice age, when massive flooding occurred on planet Earth. The waterfall is right next to the parking lot, so it's super easy to access, and you can go up some stairs and there's an upper viewing deck. Beyond that, there's a nice path that leads up to bathrooms, a restaurant, and a gift shop. Next stop was only 10 minutes away. Geyser Hot Springs features a lot of geological activity. If you've ever been to Yellowstone, it's very similar. The word geyser in Icelandic means to gush, and the big geyser at this site is actually called geyser because it was the first of its kind discovered. Now, geyser itself is more inactive these days because sediments built up underground blocking the water flow into it, but if it does erupt, it can gush as high as 200 feet in the air. If you don't get to see geyser erupt though, don't worry because there's another geyser there called Stroker that erupts regularly every 4 to 8 minutes. We hopped in the car and started heading back down towards the southern coast of Iceland to pick up the ring loop. My wife made us some delicious peanut butter and Nutella sandwiches for lunch, and after about an hour and a half of beautiful countryside driving, we ended up in Seljalands Falls. This waterfall is unique because it has a cave behind it. There's stairs that lead up and around behind the waterfall, but everything was frozen solid when we arrived, so we didn't get to see the cave, unfortunately. We traveled on a Skogafoss, and this one was super cool. We climbed up a really long staircase to get a better vantage point of the waterfall and a view of the river above. There's a nice trail you can take along the river, but we decided to go back down and play with the ice and snow next to the waterfall. From here we headed towards Vik, but on the way into town we stopped to see the Dyrley Sea Arch. That night we stayed at the Barn Hostel, which actually was pretty cool. We had a whole room to ourselves, There were 4 double bunk beds, and it was just right around the corner from Vik, so we were able to go get some dinner at Smidja Brugus, which is a brewery and has delicious food. The next day was really exciting. More cool geology, waterfalls, glaciers, and the northern lights. We had breakfast in Vik, and then we hit the road and stopped at Fjallargljúfur, which is a massive canyon that was believed to have been carved out at the end of the last ice age. As the glaciers retreated, there was massive flooding that carved out this 30-meter deep canyon. You can take a hike along the canyon's edge to get some really good views. Next stop was the Skaftafell Visitor Center. We actually did 2 hikes here. From the Visitor Center, you can either head northwest and hike 2 miles round trip to Svartafoss, which is a waterfall surrounded by hexagonal black basalt columns, which are remnants of the volcanic past, and created when lava cools really fast. If you don't want to just do the there and back hike, you can actually loop around and go to a mountaintop and get great views of the glacier below. Doing the loop extends the hike by about a mile. If you hike northeast from the visitor center, which we did also, you end up at the Skaftafell Glacier. There's a small lake at the base of the glacier, but it was so cold out that everything was frozen, including all the little icebergs or the pieces that broke off from the glacier. So for the first time in our lives, we got to climb on top of an iceberg and claim it as our own. We spent a lot of time in Skaftafell hiking, exploring, climbing, so it was about dusk by the time we headed to Hotel Skaftafell, which is about 10 minutes away. The hotel was in the middle of nowhere, but honestly the staff couldn't have been nicer. They have an on-site restaurant, we got a delicious dinner that night, and breakfast was included the next morning, and they also have Northern Light wake-up calls. I highly recommend this place. We were just lucky that the Northern Lights started around 9 p.m. It was the best show of the trip. The next morning, after some nice breakfast, we drove about an hour to join our tour guide for a glacier hike and the Sapphire Ice Cave tour. Our youngest, Caleb, wasn't old enough to actually go on the tour, so knowing that, I did a lot of research online and found Local Guides, a reputable company in the area. You can go to localguide.is for more details that I'm going to share in this video, and they were absolutely outstanding. We ended up setting up a private tour, so it was just the 5 of us and our tour guide. Big shout out to Mary because she was absolutely awesome. We met in a parking lot next to Jökulsárlón, which is a giant lake at the base of the glacier, and normally there's icebergs floating out to the sea here, but once again it was so cold that everything was absolutely frozen. We met Mary in the parking lot and she helped us get our equipment on, and then we hopped into a super jeep, which was more like a 15-passenger van with really big wheels, and then we drove like 20-25 minutes over to the glacier. Now Mary gave us a great way to remember the name of this glacier because the name looks long and complicated. She said start out with bread, milk, and yogurt, and then put a little accent on it and say it faster. Bread, milk, and yogurt. Bread, milk, and yogurt. Once we arrived at the glacier, we put on our crampons, which are little metal spikes that allow you to dig into the ice so you don't slip. Walking on a glacier was such a cool experience. And Mary took us over to what's called a moulin, which is when water melts on the glacier and it runs across and finds a weak spot in the ice and mills through it. Actually, the word moulin means mill in the French language. It was so cool just climbing into that crevasse and then just seeing the thousands of years of layers of ice. The deeper we went, the older and more historical the ice was. After that, we hiked over to the Sapphire Ice Cave. The ice caves in Iceland are constantly changing, and there's a good chance that this ice cave in particular won't exist next winter. When the summer melt hits, water runs underneath the glacier and it collapses some caves and creates other new ones. There's just no way that video or photos can do any justice to the beauty of this ice cave. When entering the cave, instead of putting on large crampons, we switched out to smaller crampons to still have a grip but not destroy the floor of the ice cave. After checking out the 3 ice cave rooms, we hiked back to the super jeep and drove back to the parking lot spot for some food trucks lunch. The fish and chips we had were really good. And by the way, credit cards are accepted just about everywhere in Iceland. Honestly, we really didn't need cash other than for tips. Also, cell phone signal was really good all throughout Iceland. I don't think there was a time where I didn't have any bars. After lunch, we quickly checked out the Diamond Beach, but there were actually no little ice diamonds on the beach this time of year, because the icebergs that feed the beach and all break up into small ice pieces were actually frozen in the lake above, so nothing was traveling down. Still pretty beautiful though. We then hit the road and headed towards Hoffman for the night, and when we got there we checked out our apartment, which was rented through VRBO, and then explored around the fishing village. Right below our apartment was a restaurant called Z Bistro, and then that night we saw some more northern lights. With a lot more red this time, but it was so windy it was hard to get a clear picture. The next day was our long driving day, and we covered a ton of mileage on the Ring Loop. We were traveling from Hoffen all the way to Akiri, but stopped in the town of Egilsstaðir for lunch, which is considered the eastern capital of Iceland. There were two really good parts to the day. The first was the extremely scenic drive through the eastern fjords and mountains, and the second was playing in the snow for hours on the side of the road with the kids. We hit a little snowstorm. Enjoy this little montage.
Oh, good work, Kale. Nice work.
We arrived in Akiri at dusk, but right before you get to the city, you have to go through a tunnel that charges the only toll on the entire Ring Loop. Go to tunnel.is, type your license plate number in, and pay the toll before or after you go through it. You just have to do it within a certain amount of time. We had a pretty nice apartment for the night in Akiri. We walked around to check out the town, and got some breakfast at a local cafe right near our apartment. We then hopped in our car and drove about 30 minutes up to Haganes to go whale watching in the Norwegian Sea. When we checked in, we were already bundled to the max because we knew it was going to be cold, but they gave us these amazing coveralls that just went over all of our clothes that were already bundling us. So we were pretty warm for the entire 3-hour trip. It was a really scenic ride out to deeper waters. Everybody was searching for whales, but this time of year it's kind of hit or miss, because some whales migrate south. We finally ended up seeing harbor porpoises, which are actually in the whale family. So technically we didn't get skunked. But amazingly, the next day of the trip, we saw humpback whales just off the shore when we were on our hike. I'll get to that later. When we got back from whale watching, it was mid-afternoon, so we headed right towards Berganes, which is a town on the west coast of Iceland, just north of Reykjavik. I chose this town because it really set us up for touring the next day, but it was a pretty cool place. The town is over 1,000 years old, with a very rich Icelandic history. We stayed at a hotel called B59. We were all able to fit in one room because there was a queen-size bed and bunk beds on the side. After getting settled, we walked through town and ended up coming to a place called the Settlement Center, which had absolutely amazing views. I remember being really hangry while filming this because we skipped breakfast before hitting the road. I'm a firm believer that things happen for a reason though, because it led us to the Harbor Cafe in Grintafir. If you're in town, I highly recommend you stop in and say hello to the family-owned Harbor Cafe. Food was good, but the people who owned it made the experience really nice. This small fishing village is right next to Kirkjufell, the most photographed mountain in all of Iceland because of Game of Thrones. In Game of Thrones, this landmark is located north of the wall and also the birthplace of the Night King. So fans, including myself, get a picture in front of it to pay tribute to the show, minus the final season, of course. From there, we headed west and we looped around the peninsula, which is mostly the third national park in Iceland, Snæfellsjökull. The entire area is filled with a system of active stratovolcanoes. There's a large pool of liquid magma 2 to 3 kilometers below the surface. Between volcanic eruptions and the glacial carving from the last ice age, the landscape is really interesting to look at here. We stopped by Sander, which is a volcanic black sand beach. There were a lot of cool nooks to explore. The beach itself was littered with iron scraps from the remains of a World War II British trawler. Next, we headed over to Vanselir Caves. To visit, you need to set up an appointment ahead of time. The caves are actually lava tubes, which is much different than the limestone caves I'm used to seeing. When the local volcanoes were active, they spewed out lots of lava. Lava then flowed along the surface like a river, but all the lava on the surface in contact with the air cooled very, very quickly, which created a roof over the lava flowing below. A void space was formed between the lava river and the cooled lava roof, and those are the lava tubes, the tunnels, the caves that we explored. We went from the caves to the lighthouse. Next to the lighthouse was a visitor center where you could learn some history, get some gifts, and use the bathroom. From there, we went to one of the most scenic spots of the whole trip, if that's possible, because everything's scenic, Helmner Viewpoint. It's also pretty cool when you recognize the cover of the book you've been reading. Thanks, Holly and Craig, for the book. We found it. There's a hiking trail that follows the coastline between Helmner and Arnarstapi. We drove to each side of the trailhead and didn't have to hike in very far to get extremely scenic views. Lots of birds, but no puffins. They don't return till April, as we found out. So if you're going in the summer, you get to see the puffins. But if you're going in the winter, you get to see the northern lights. Oh, and this is where we also spotted the humpback whales right off the coast. That afternoon, we came full circle, both literally and figuratively, as we returned to Reykjavik. We stayed in a different part of the city, just around the corner from Hallgrímskirkja Church, which was designed to look like Thor's hammer, and in the front there's hexagonal basaltic-looking columns that's representative of the landscape in Iceland. We stayed in another nice apartment called Ray's Apartments, which is owned by a hotel just down the road. So we checked in at the hotel, they gave us a key, we walked down, dropped our stuff, and then walked around the city. We ended up going to a delicious Thai food restaurant for dinner. And then walked some more around the city, bought some souvenirs. The next morning we were flying out at 5 p.m, so we had a half a day in Reykjavik just to walk around and explore some more. We had the pleasure to tour the Hallgrímskirkja Church on Sunday. The organ's massive, the church is beautiful, and you can buy a ticket to take the elevator to the top of the tower. I highly recommend it because you get this beautiful 360-degree panoramic view of the whole city. And the bells were so cool. On our drive out of the city, we stopped one more time by the Icelandic hot dog place to grab a quick lunch, and we were off to the airport. This was definitely an amazing trip, and making this video is actually really cool because it's given me the opportunity to reflect back on all the incredible things that we saw. If you have any questions about the trip, please feel free to leave a comment, and I'll do my absolute best getting back to you as soon as I can. Also, let me know if you want more content like this. I'd be happy to share some more of my travel plans with you. Please like and subscribe. Until the next one.